Hello, we've been fortunate today to have Dr. Bruce Hoffman, professor from Georgetown, with us. Welcome and thank you very much, Bruce.
Well, thank you very much for having me.
We've been talking today about Salafism, self-emerging radicals within the U.S., and I would love to get your views for our students and alumni.
Well, it's difficult to get a handle on what's going on in the United States. Clearly the same heady currents of radicalization, the alienation, the polarization of both second and third generation, but also new migrant communities that exist in Europe has not been as evident in this country. But at the same time, though, I think it would be a mistake for us to think that the same fervors, the same emotions that are elicited by, for instance, America's involvement in Iraq, by the Palestinian-Israeli issue, by the issue in Kashmir, for example, in Chechnya and Bosnia and so on, don't have, in fact, a global effect, and that they can't be compartmentalized or can't be isolated to any one region throughout the world. Clearly, those conflicts and the messages that radicals attempt to communicate from those conflicts are designed to have a worldwide appeal. They haven't resonated, at least to an identifiable extent, in the United States yet. But I think no one can ever be completely complacent.
But that remains a huge concern for security officials, even though it hasn't perhaps resonated to the level it has in Europe or Britain. Still is an ongoing concern for us.
No, that's right. And I think there's two aspects to the issue. On the one hand, especially in Europe, there clearly is enormous radicalization and mobilization. But we shouldn't be blinded to the fact that that's the only threat and that this is entirely an organic, a self-selected, a self-generated phenomena. Rather, what we see, I think especially clearly in Europe, is that there's very much this process of radicalization that is to an extent organic. But at the same time, that doesn't mean that there isn't an organized, subversive terrorist element poised to take advantage of it, to exploit it, and indeed to encourage it. And that's the challenge. You see both radicalization and subversion. And the subversion comes from al-Qaeda.
Oh, that's very interesting. Now, so you have both things going on at the same time, but where on the one hand we would like to discount organized terrorist organizations, perhaps believing that we've broken the back of al-Qaeda like we've heard in the news?
I think that's right. In recent years we've tended to focus almost exclusively on the radicalization aspect of it, which isn't wrong, but it's wrong when you neglect the subversion or the fact that there's still a hierarchical organization involved. And I think the difficulty we face is that in the immediate aftermath of Operation Enduring Freedom, the invasion of Afghanistan in October and November 2001, through to the beginning of 2003, we really did have al-Qaeda on the run. They really had been diminished. Their back, if it hadn't been broken, it was certainly weakened. The difficulty, though, is that in the past 3 years, as we've become more and more focused on Iraq, as the violence in Afghanistan has spiked, al-Qaeda has taken advantage of our preoccupation or concerns with specific places or other regions of the world to regroup and to reorganize, and they've resolved to carry on the struggle. And one of the manifestations is they're seeking to exploit or take advantage of this radicalization for their own attack purposes.
So essentially you're saying that Iraq would be one of those that have kind of taken us down that road. They've used that time while we're there to rebuild, even though we may have had them on the run at one point. Now they seem to be moving back towards a centralized capability again?
Well, yes. I mean, you only have to go to Ayman al-Zawahiri's own words. On the second anniversary of the 9/11 attacks, he had said that we, al-Qaeda, have America exactly where we want them, caught between two fires, that they're in Iraq, and if they stay, we'll bleed them to death, and if they leave, then they'll lose everything. In other words, they'll lose all this prestige. But clearly, it's been part of their strategy, and certainly has been in their interest, to keep us enmeshed and locked into Iraq while our military is weakened, at least while it's tied down, so that they can build up elsewhere and prepare attacks in other parts of the world.
Do you see the same thing in relation to Afghanistan, or very different? Or do you look at those two?
No, I think Afghanistan has become more of an opportunity for al-Qaeda that they've been very quick to take advantage of, using the reconstituted Taliban as sort of their foot soldiers. But that's been more opportunistic. I mean, that was, I think, an unexpected gift. They saw our involvement in Iraq as potentially providing them the breathing space that they needed, and they took advantage of that breathing space to rebuild their capabilities.
Any final words on Salafists perhaps coming to the level of Europe here in the United States?
Well, I think the most relevant thing I can say is that in the months preceding the July 7th, 2005 bombings in London, even as accomplished, even as sophisticated, even as knowledgeable security and intelligence and law enforcement agencies as exist in the United Kingdom were blinded to the threat of massive attack along the lines of the London bombings. And even when they did contemplate it, they thought that it would be entirely homegrown or entirely organic. What the investigations since July 2005 have revealed is that these weren't self-radicalized individuals. In some instances, they had a pedigree that preceded 9/11, that there was a clear organizational involvement, including that of al-Qaeda, but also of other Pakistani jihadi groups, that this was much more of an international conspiracy than one that was hatched locally in the suburbs of Leeds. But what one sees is that these groups taking advantage of a suburban location where police forces perhaps may not have the intelligence capabilities, may not have the manpower, may not have the knowledge that larger municipalities have, and seeing this as an ideal operational base, for instance, where they can function without arousing suspicion or attention. And I think what we have to be sensitive to is that terrorists are constantly learning. That's the only way they can succeed. We have to become as smart as they do and learn from how they're learning and see how they're shifting more operations to the suburbs, not into urban areas, and understand that to be a pattern. Even in this country, we know, for example, that the hijackers of American Airlines Flight 77 on 9/11, 2001, the plane that was seized shortly after it took off from Dulles Airport in Washington, D.C., those hijackers didn't stay in the District of Columbia, where there's a metropolitan police force that, of course, because of many of the federal targets there, has an anti-terrorism division, an intelligence division. Rather, they stayed out in quiet, sleepy suburban Maryland, which they used as a base to enroll in a local Gold's Gym, to bulk themselves up physically, but to prepare the attacks. And I think this is one of the challenges we face, that we need to have the kind of synergy between law enforcement, not just at the vertical level, the federal, state, and local that's often spoken of, but also very much at a horizontal that involves not just federal, state, and local operating together, but involves a number of local municipalities, interlocking suburbs, cooperating with the metropolitan area, in turn with the state authorities, and in turn with the federal authorities.
Well, while you say that, it makes me sad on the one hand that we are still prone to this threat. On the other hand, being here at the Center for Homeland Defense and Security, that's exactly our mission, is an attempt to link the federal, state, and local, not only at the vertical, but in the horizontal. And I thank you so much for coming today and giving us a chance to pick your brain a little bit and learn so much from you. Thank you.
It's a great pleasure. Thank you.